What if the single most important moment of your life arrived not with a grand announcement, not with a standing ovation, but with the sickening crack of shattering glass and the acrid sting of smoke filling your lungs? What if everything you had ever believed about success, about leadership, and about the true measure of a human being came crashing down around you in a whirlwind of panic, only to be rebuilt by the hands of a complete stranger who had every reason to run? There are moments in this chaotic, unpredictable journey we call life when the universe strips away all pretense, all titles, all carefully constructed facades, and forces us to confront a single, unflinching question. When the flames rise and the crowd scatters, do we stop for the fallen, or do we save ourselves? This is the story of one such moment, a moment that unfolded inside a gleaming tower of corporate ambition, where the pursuit of profit often overshadowed the pursuit of purpose. It is a tale that begins with terror and ends with transformation, weaving together the fates of two souls who could not have been more different, yet who discovered in each other the very essence of what it means to be truly alive. Before we embark on this deeply moving narrative, take a breath and ask yourself, do you still believe that one simple act of selflessness can send ripples through the fabric of an entire community? If your answer is yes, then prepare to have your faith in humanity reignited, because this is a story that proves kindness is not merely a virtue, it is a revolution. The deafening explosion of tempered glass fracturing into 1,000 razor-sharp fragments reverberated through the vast, echoing corridors of the prestigious Falcon Heights corporate center, a sound so violent and unexpected that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. In an instant, the meticulously ordered world of boardrooms, quarterly projections, and executive luncheons dissolved into absolute chaos, as terrified office workers abandoned their ergonomic chairs and expensive gadgets, their polished professional composure replaced by primal, unadulterated fear. A dense, menacing cloud of acrid smoke began its insidious crawl through the sun-drenched atrium, curling around marble pillars and obscuring the expensive artwork that adorned the walls, while the building's emergency alarm system erupted into a shrill, relentless wail that offered no respite and no mercy. Panic, that most contagious of human emotions, spread through the fleeing crowd with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire consuming dry brush, turning rational men and women into a desperate, surging tide of humanity, all pushing toward the exits, each person convinced that every single second they wasted could be the difference between drawing their next breath and succumbing to the inferno. In the midst of this frantic exodus, near the grand, sweeping marble staircase that descended into the lobby, a striking woman in an elegant black dress suddenly crumpled to the unforgiving stone floor, her face contorted in agony as she clutched her injured leg, which had been twisted and damaged during her desperate attempt to assist a panicking assistant. Her voice, when she finally managed to speak, emerged as little more than a fragile whisper, a sound so faint that it was nearly swallowed by the surrounding cacophony, yet it carried within it the profound, heartbreaking weight of complete and utter surrender, as she accepted that her fate was no longer in her own hands. Through tear-blurred eyes, she looked up at the stranger who had paused beside her, and with every ounce of strength she could muster, she silently, desperately pleaded with him to abandon her and save himself, her gaze conveying the heartbreaking message that she was beyond rescue and that his only hope lay in leaving her behind. "Leave me," her eyes seemed to scream, even as her lips barely moved, "I cannot walk. I am nothing but a burden now. Save yourself while you still can." Dozens upon dozens of frantic employees surged past them without a single pause, without a single backward glance, their survival instincts overriding every shred of human decency, because in that terrifying moment, each of them believed with absolute certainty that their own life hung in the balance and that stopping to help would mean certain death. But amidst this sea of selfishness and self-preservation, one exhausted, overworked single father made a split-second decision that would irrevocably alter the course of not just one life, but countless others, a decision born not from calculation or ambition, but from the simple, unshakable conviction that no human being should ever be left behind to face their darkest hour alone. Before we continue this deeply emotional odyssey of courage and redemption, I want to invite you to reflect on the state of our world today, and to ask yourself whether you still believe that genuine, selfless kindness has a place in our increasingly cold and indifferent society. If you believe that every person, regardless of their station or circumstance, deserves a second chance and a helping hand, then I humbly ask you to take a brief moment to show your support by engaging with this video, give it a like, leave a thoughtful comment below, share it with your friends and family who could use a reminder that goodness still exists, And consider subscribing to our channel so that you never miss another inspiring story that rekindles hope in the human spirit. Your participation, your engagement, and your willingness to spread this message of love and compassion are what enable us to continue bringing you these powerful narratives that remind us all that humanity, despite its many flaws, is never truly, permanently lost. The stranger who stopped when everyone else ran was 38-year-old Elias Mercer, a widowed father and former dreamer who had long ago buried his own ambitions beneath the crushing weight of responsibility, working as an overnight maintenance technician for a third-party cleaning contractor that serviced the corporate tower. Every single sunrise marked the bitter end of another grueling, sleep-deprived shift, a time when most people were just beginning to stir. But for Elias, it was the moment he had to summon the last dregs of his energy to hurry home and prepare a warm, nutritious breakfast for his 8-year-old son, Rowan, a bright-eyed little boy who was the sole source of light in his father's otherwise dim and weary existence. Life, it could be said, had never been particularly gentle or generous with Elias. It had thrown obstacle after obstacle in his path, testing his resilience at every turn, and yet, he had somehow managed to endure, to persevere, and to keep moving forward even when every fiber of his being screamed at him to give up. After losing his beloved wife to a prolonged, devastating illness 5 years earlier, Elias had been forced to bury his own professional dreams and personal aspirations deep within the recesses of his heart, making the solemn vow that his son would never, ever go to bed feeling unloved, unwanted, or abandoned, no matter how exhausted or broken his father felt. Every single dollar that passed through his calloused hands was carefully budgeted and allocated, because every dollar mattered when you were trying to raise a child on a maintenance worker's meager salary, just as every hour of every day had to be meticulously managed to ensure that Rowan never felt the absence of his mother as a void that could never be filled. Yet, despite carrying these invisible, heavy burdens day in and day out, despite the sleepless nights and the endless worry about how to make ends meet, Elias Mercer steadfastly refused to allow bitterness, resentment, or cynicism to take root within his soul, clinging instead to the quiet, unwavering belief that even if life had forgotten to show him kindness, he would never, under any circumstances, stop extending kindness to others who crossed his path. On the fateful morning of the disaster, Elias had been performing his routine duties, repairing faulty electrical panels on the upper floors of the Falcon Heights corporate center, when a sudden, catastrophic mechanical explosion tore through the building's infrastructure, sending shockwaves through every floor and shattering windows for blocks around. Emergency sirens and alarms erupted in every corridor, their piercing wails drowning out the screams of frightened office workers who abandoned their meetings, dropped their expensive laptops without a second thought, and sprinted frantically toward the nearest emergency exits, their only instinct being to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the growing danger. Security guards, their faces etched with panic, shouted conflicting instructions as the thick, choking smoke gradually crept through the ventilation system, filling hallways and stairwells with a toxic haze that made it increasingly difficult to see or breathe. In the midst of this overwhelming confusion and terror, Elias's keen eyes noticed a figure lying crumpled and motionless halfway down the central marble staircase, a figure that everyone else was simply stepping over or rushing past in their desperate bid to escape. The woman was Vivian Ashcroft, the celebrated, formidable CEO of Ashcroft Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing and most influential technology companies in the entire country, a woman whose face adorned the covers of business magazines and whose name was synonymous with fearless leadership, demanding standards, and an almost impossible-to-impress demeanor that intimidated even the most seasoned executives. Thousands upon thousands of people admired her staggering success from afar, but very, very few had ever glimpsed the lonely, vulnerable woman hidden beneath the carefully crafted headlines and the polished public persona, the woman who had sacrificed friendships, relationships, and any semblance of a normal life to build her empire. As her own employees rushed past her in sheer panic, Vivian had twisted her ankle severely while attempting to help one of her terrified assistants to safety, and the fall had caused significant damage to her leg, rendering her unable to stand or even bear any weight on the injured limb. She struggled valiantly to push herself upright, but the searing, white-hot pain forced her back onto the cold, unfeeling marble floor, and she realized with a sinking heart that she was completely and utterly trapped. Elias reached her just as another frantic wave of frightened people pushed through the staircase, nearly trampling her in their haste, and Vivian's face, which had once commanded boardrooms with steely authority, now showed nothing but raw pain and heartbreaking acceptance of her dire situation. She truly believed that she would only slow Elias down, that her presence would be the anchor that dragged him to his death, and so she quietly, earnestly urged him to leave her behind and escape before the situation deteriorated even further. Instead of following the instinct of self-preservation that was screaming at him to run, Elias calmly, deliberately removed his heavy work jacket, which was soaked with sweat and grime, and gently placed it beneath her trembling shoulders to shield her fragile body from the biting cold of the stone floor. Without asking who she was, without inquiring about her net worth or her social status, without any expectation of reward or even gratitude, he carefully, gingerly lifted her onto his strong, tired back, positioning her weight as evenly as possible so that he could bear the burden. She protested weakly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged him to put her down, but Elias only tightened his grip around her legs and began the treacherous, agonizing descent down the crowded, smoke-filled emergency stairs, each step more difficult and hazardous than the last. The smoke grew thicker and darker around them, stinging their eyes and burning their throats, while the emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the narrow stairwell feel like a nightmare maze. Several frightened employees squeezed past them without offering any assistance, too consumed by their own terror to even acknowledge the struggling man and the injured woman on his back, and Vivian could feel Elias's labored breathing becoming more ragged and strained beneath her weight. Yet, he never once, not for a single fleeting second, suggested putting her down or finding an easier route. He simply continued his arduous descent, pausing every few flights of stairs only long enough to catch his breath and steady his trembling legs before pushing forward with renewed, desperate determination. Sweat poured from his brow and soaked through his thin shirt, while his knees buckled and shook from the sheer physical exertion, but his resolve never wavered, because in his heart, he knew that abandoning this woman would be a betrayal of everything he believed in. Unbeknownst to Elias, the building's hidden security cameras had captured every single moment of his heroic rescue, recording the selfless act for posterity, even as the chaos raged around them and the flames licked closer to the stairwell. Outside the burning building, firefighters and paramedics had finally arrived in force, and they reached Elias just as he stumbled, exhausted and barely conscious, through the main entrance, carrying Vivian safely into the fresh, cool morning air that had never smelled so sweet. The very second his feet touched the solid, reassuring pavement of the sidewalk, every ounce of strength that had carried him through that nightmare suddenly evaporated, and he gently, carefully lowered Vivian onto a waiting stretcher before collapsing onto the hard ground himself, his body finally surrendering to the overwhelming fatigue and strain. Paramedics rushed toward both of them, their trained hands working quickly to assess their conditions, while news crews who had been covering the emergency from a safe distance quickly noticed the incredible, cinematic scene unfolding before their eyes. Reporters, always hungry for a compelling story, initially assumed that Elias must have been a member of Vivian's elite executive protection team, because surely no ordinary person would have risked their life in such a dramatic fashion for a complete stranger. When they learned the astonishing truth, that Elias was simply a lowly maintenance worker, a janitor of sorts, who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but had chosen to act with extraordinary courage, a wave of disbelief and astonishment spread through the assembled crowd like a shockwave. Vivian remained hospitalized for several days, recovering from torn ligaments and various minor injuries, while Elias, true to his humble nature, returned to work the very next evening, acting as though nothing extraordinary had happened, as though carrying a woman to safety through a burning building was just another part of his nightly routine. To him, helping another human being in distress required no reward, no recognition, and no fanfare. It was simply the right thing to do, and he had done it without a second thought. 1 week later, Elias was summoned unexpectedly to his supervisor's office, a summons that filled him with dread, because in his experience, such calls usually meant bad news, disciplinary action, or layoffs. Instead of a reprimand or a pink slip, however, he found a sleek, luxurious black sedan waiting for him outside the office building, its engine purring softly in the morning sunlight. Completely and utterly confused, he tentatively stepped inside the vehicle, his mind racing with paranoid thoughts that someone higher up had blamed him for the accident or that he was about to lose his job in the most humiliating way possible. The sedan drove him smoothly through the city streets, eventually pulling up to the gleaming, imposing headquarters of Ashcroft Dynamics, a building he had only ever seen from the outside during his long, lonely nights. His heart pounded in his chest as he was escorted through the lavish lobby and into the executive boardroom, where dozens of high-ranking company directors, all dressed in impeccable suits and designer attire, stood waiting in respectful silence. At the far end of the massive, polished mahogany table sat Vivian herself, who had recovered sufficiently to walk with the assistance of an elegant cane, her face radiating a warmth and gratitude that no one in that room had ever seen before. The moment Elias entered the room, every single executive rose to their feet in a spontaneous, heartfelt show of respect, and Vivian slowly, deliberately approached him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, before thanking him profusely in front of everyone present, her voice trembling with emotion. She explained to the assembled directors that during her years of building a billion-dollar empire from the ground up, she had learned many lessons about business, strategy, and competition, but the most important lesson of all had come from this humble maintenance worker, that success could so easily hide selfishness and that wealth could so easily blind people to what truly mattered. Hundreds of people had passed her by on that fateful day, she continued. Some had known exactly who she was, and others had certainly recognized her face from countless television interviews and magazine covers, yet almost no one had stopped to offer even a moment of assistance. Only one stranger, one exhausted, overworked, underappreciated maintenance worker, had chosen compassion over fear, humanity over self-preservation, and courage over convenience. Vivian had reviewed the emergency security footage countless times, watching in awe as Elias repeatedly risked his own safety for someone he believed would never be able to repay him, someone he had no reason to help except for the simple, profound conviction that all lives have equal value. For the first time in many years, she admitted openly that she had forgotten what true leadership actually looked like. She had surrounded herself with people who flattered her and agreed with her, but she had lost sight of the principles that should guide every person in authority. She then made a stunning announcement. Ashcroft Dynamics would establish a new, comprehensive employee assistance foundation, dedicated to supporting struggling single parents, low-income workers, and everyday heroes like Elias who often went unnoticed and unappreciated. The foundation would be named after Elias, not because he sought or craved attention, in fact, he was visibly uncomfortable with the very idea, but because Vivian wanted every single employee in the company to remember, every single day, that character, integrity, and compassion mattered far more than fancy titles or impressive job descriptions. Elias stood there, completely speechless, his mind struggling to process the enormity of what was happening, because he had never, in his wildest dreams, imagined that his simple, instinctive act of kindness could inspire such profound and far-reaching change. But Vivian's greatest surprise had not yet been revealed. She had saved the most life-altering gift for last. She quietly, reverently handed Elias a thick, official-looking envelope, inside of which was an offer unlike anything he had ever expected or even dared to hope for. It wasn't money, though there was a generous salary attached. It wasn't charity, though it would certainly change his financial circumstances. It was a full-time, permanent position overseeing the company's entire community outreach and employee welfare programs, a role with real authority, real influence, and real power to make a difference in the lives of thousands of workers. Vivian explained, with genuine sincerity, that technical skills, advanced degrees, and years of experience could always be taught or acquired, but integrity, empathy, and a genuine understanding of struggle could not be manufactured or faked. She wanted someone who had walked through the valley of hardship and had emerged with his heart still intact, someone who truly understood what it meant to struggle, to sacrifice, and to persevere, to help shape a workplace culture built on compassion, support, and mutual respect, rather than on fear, competition, and ruthless ambition. At first, Elias hesitated, his mind flooded with self-doubt and insecurity. He had spent years believing that men like him, men without college degrees or impressive connections, belonged permanently in the background, performing menial tasks while successful people, people with money and influence, made all the important decisions. But Vivian gently, firmly reminded him that true leaders were not defined by their resumes, their bank accounts, or their social standing. They were defined by the content of their hearts, the strength of their character, and their willingness to stand up for others when it was easier to walk away. After a long, soul-searching conversation with young Rowan that evening, sitting on their worn-out couch in their modest apartment, Elias finally accepted the offer, recognizing that this was not just an opportunity for personal advancement, but a chance to honor his late wife's memory by making the world a better, more compassionate place for their son. The transition, however, was not smooth or easy. Many board members and senior executives openly questioned whether a former maintenance worker, a man who had never attended an Ivy League school or managed a large budget, truly belonged in executive meetings where billion-dollar decisions were made. Some quietly, snidely doubted his abilities, whispering behind his back that he was nothing more than a diversity hire, a charity case propped up by Vivian's guilt. Others openly expected him to fail spectacularly, to make embarrassing mistakes, and to eventually slink back to his old job in disgrace. Instead of being intimidated or defeated by this resistance, Elias employed the same quiet determination that had carried him through the burning building. He listened far more than he spoke, absorbing the complexities of corporate culture while remaining true to his humble, grounded nature. He made it a point to visit employees working late-night shifts, the janitors who cleaned the offices after everyone had gone home, the cafeteria workers who served breakfast to bleary-eyed executives, the security officers who guarded the building through the long, lonely hours, the receptionists who greeted every visitor with a smile, and the interns who were often treated as invisible. He remembered every single name, every personal detail, every struggle and triumph they shared with him, and he found practical, meaningful solutions to problems that executives had ignored or dismissed for years, such as inadequate break rooms, unfair shift schedules, and a lack of affordable childcare options. Slowly but surely, workplace morale began to transform in ways that no one had predicted. Employee turnover dropped dramatically, productivity improved naturally and organically because people finally felt valued, heard, and respected, and the company's reputation began to attract top talent from across the country. Months later, Ashcroft Dynamics received national recognition, including prestigious awards and glowing features in major publications, as one of the most compassionate and employee-friendly employers in the entire country. Journalists lined up to praise Vivian's visionary leadership, her bold decision to break the mold and prioritize people over profits, and she smiled warmly every time, knowing deep in her heart that the real lesson, the real inspiration, had come from a man wearing dusty work boots and a worn-out uniform, not from someone wearing expensive leather shoes and designer suits. One quiet, beautiful Saturday morning, long after the chaos and transformation had settled, Elias and Rowan visited a newly built community playground, a vibrant, colorful space that had been funded entirely by the foundation that now bore Elias's name. Children of all ages laughed and played together, their joyful shouts echoing across the grass, while struggling, overworked parents enjoyed a rare, precious moment of peace and respite, watching their children with smiles of pure contentment. Vivian quietly joined them, arriving without cameras, without reporters, without any of the trappings of her celebrity status, simply as a friend and a fellow human being who had been forever changed by the events of that fateful day. Watching young Rowan race across the playground, his face flushed with happiness and his laughter ringing through the air, reminded Vivian that true success was never, ever measured by the size of one's office, the balance of one's bank account, or the number of one's stock options. It was measured, pure and simple, by the number of lives that were changed, uplifted, and improved through simple, courageous acts of kindness and compassion. Sometimes, Vivian reflected, the strongest, most resilient people in the world are not those blessed with enormous wealth, widespread influence, or powerful connections. Sometimes, they are ordinary, unassuming fathers and mothers, carrying invisible burdens and fighting silent battles, yet still finding enough strength, enough courage, and enough love to carry someone else through their darkest hour. That unforgettable, terrifying morning inside the burning building had begun with a powerful, successful woman believing that she had been completely and irrevocably left behind by a world that valued self-preservation above all else, but it had ended with an entire multinational corporation discovering that the greatest leaders, the most inspiring heroes, are often the people whom nobody notices until they make the choice to stop and help. If this deeply moving, heartfelt story has touched your heart, if it has rekindled your faith in the power of human kindness, then I invite you to show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone in your life who still believes in the goodness of people, and subscribing to our channel to spread love and hope on a daily basis. Your support, your engagement, and your willingness to share these messages of compassion are what allow us to continue bringing these inspiring narratives to people who may need them most in their moments of doubt and despair. And now, as a special request from our community, before you leave this video, please take a moment to type the following words in the comments section below: kindness always finds a way. We would absolutely love to know where in the world you are watching from, and we are genuinely curious to hear your perspective on whether you believe that one single act of compassion, one moment of selflessness, can truly alter the trajectory of an entire life. The world around us often celebrates power, money, status, and success with a feverish intensity, but if we take a step back and look at the grand tapestry of human history, we will find that it is quietly, persistently shaped by ordinary, imperfect people who make the courageous choice to extend compassion when everyone else chooses convenience, safety, and self-interest. Elias Mercer never expected recognition, never sought fame, and never dreamed of the extraordinary turn his life would take. He simply refused, with every fiber of his being, to abandon a fellow human being in their moment of greatest need. And because of that single, split-second decision, because he chose to carry a stranger to safety when every instinct told him to run, one frightened, desperate whisper became the seed from which countless new hopes, new opportunities, and new beginnings sprouted, proving once and for all that even in the darkest, most terrifying moments, one brave, selfless heart can illuminate the path for everyone else who is stumbling. Through the shadows.